Good morning, and welcome to all. Those of you who are live with us on Zoom, or live with us on Facebook, or those of you who are going to watch this later on, welcome to one and all. What makes a hero? That's the question of today's class, Practical Parsha. What makes a hero? So we're going to speak about a number of stories throughout Torah and throughout the Talmud, which hopefully can answer this question of what makes a hero. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob our forefather, this week leaves his home of Be'er Sheva in the south of Israel, where he's living with his parents, Isaac and Rebekah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and he's heading out towards Haran, Mesopotamia, Iraq. That's where he's headed. And the verse makes it very clear. Veyeizei Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva, and Jacob leaves Be'er Sheva. Vayelech Harana, and he goes towards Haran. The question is, we know he was in Be'er Sheva. That's where he was living with his parents, obvious. So it's like saying, I'm going on holiday. I'm going on holiday to Kruger Park. So I'm leaving Johannesburg, I'm leaving Gauteng, and I'm going to Kruger Park. It's obvious that I'm leaving Johannesburg. Everyone knows that I live in Johannesburg. So that's not necessary to say. Just say, I'm going on holiday to Kruger Park. And so too, the verse could have said that Jacob traveled to Haran. Why does it make it an emphasis that he left Be'er Sheva and he traveled to Haran? That's quite obvious. So we learn a very, very powerful statement. Rashi brings the following explanation. It says Rabbi Veyeizei, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon. This teaches us that while a righteous person is in the city, he becomes the splendor and the majesty of the city. When you depart from that city, all the splendor and the majesty departs as well. That's why it must tell us that Yaakov left Be'er Sheva. Because when a righteous person is in the city, he or she contributes to the majesty and the splendor of the city. The moment the tzaddik, the righteous person, leaves the city, as Yaakov did, suddenly the majesty and the splendor leaves a vacuum, leaves a void. Because the sign of a righteous person is one who makes change in their environment, so that people feel their presence. They know they are there. They're making a difference to society. That's the sign of a righteous person. That's the sign of Yaakov Avinu. And that's why the Torah emphasizes that he left Be'er Sheva. You know why? It wasn't insignificant that he left Be'er Sheva. A major change was created when he left Be'er Sheva. A void was left in Be'er Sheva when Jacob left. That's why we emphasize this. Now the question is like this. Who was living in Be'er Sheva? Where did he leave from? He wasn't just leaving his own home. He had parents. Isaac and Rebekah were living in Be'er Sheva. They were the first matriarch and patriarch before Yaakov came around. They weren't the first. Obviously, Abraham and Sarah were first. But Isaac and Rebekah were living in Be'er Sheva. He left them. Surely Isaac and Rebekah had created a sense of majesty, splendor within Be'er Sheva. So that their son Jacob leaves. Did he really leave a void? Did he really leave a void? Surely they were there. They were holy. They were God's people. So what does it mean that Yaakov left and he created a void and his splendor and his majesty left? But they were there, alive, in the city. Surely they were present. So, interestingly, we find about Yitzchak that Jacob uses the terminology. It says there, and he's referred to. Isaac is referred. It says in the verse, Elokei Yitzchak. Basically, Yaakov has a prayer in this week's portion. And when we understand his prayer, we'll be able to understand the first question. Yaakov makes a prayer. he turns to the God of Abraham and the God of Yitzchak. And he says, God of Abraham, God of Yitzchak, protect me, save me, keep me safe on my journeys. Now the commentators pick up on this and they say, well, hold on. Generally, we don't find Hashem associating his name or being called the God of someone who's alive. Generally, the principle is that God is associated to the God of those who have passed. Elokei Avraham. Yeah, Elokei Avraham makes sense because Avraham had passed already. So that's why he's the God of Avraham. But Elokei Yitzchak, when Jacob says God of Isaac, God of my father Isaac, it's a very strange terminology because Yitzchak's still alive. And the principle says that God does not associate his name to the living. Why is that? Because you don't know yet what's going to be with the life of the living. You're not sure what journey this person is going to take just yet. They've still got a whole life ahead of them. And so God waits it out. He waits it out till the person has lived their full life before being associated to their name. So the question is asked, then why Yitzchak? Is he called the God of Yitzchak? Why does Jacob say, the God of my father Yitzchak? Yitzchak is still alive in Beersheba. What is Yaakov? Why are we seeing for the first time Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak, while someone is still alive? But listen to this. You know why? Because Yitzchak wasn't fully alive. Yitzchak wasn't fully alive. Yitzchak, in fact, was considered dead. Listen to what the sages said. That because Yitzchak was blind at home, as a result, he was considered dead. And because he was considered dead, and we'll elaborate on this point in a moment, because he was considered dead, that's why Jacob could say Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak. Because Yitzchak's life was no longer the same way it was. He was now considered dead. He was now blind. Now, what does that mean? What that means is like this. You know the famous Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers that talks about different milestone ages, right? The 5-year-old studies Mikra, the verses of Torah. The 10-year-old studies Mishnah. The 18-year-old gets married, right? And 40-year-old represents wisdom. And 50-year-old represents, and so on and so forth. Every milestone is mentioned there. 80-year-old represents Gevurah, strength. Look there in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. You'll see at the Torah that the sages gave different milestones, different character traits. You know what it says about 100? 100-year-old. And traditionally in the Commonwealth countries, if you reach 100 in good health, please God, you get a letter from the Queen, right? Acknowledging your 100th birthday. It's a big milestone birthday. But listen to what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says about a 100-year-old, Ki'ilu met, it's as if they're dead and you've left the world. Ki'ilu met, and as if you left the world. That's not a great way of celebrating 100, as if I'm dead. What does that mean? You know, it's interesting that at all birthday parties of milestone birthdays, people like to focus on this Mishnah. You're now turning 30, and 30 is about koach and strength, and 40 and 50 and 60. We highlight all these milestone birthdays, and the next decade should be filled with blessings and this qualities of the Mishnah. Funny, when it gets to 100, nobody quotes this Mishnah anymore. Because the Mishnah says, what is 100? As if you're dead and left the world. No one likes to quote this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah actually mean? What it means is, you're not dead. You have just left the superficial, mundane, material environment of the world. That's what it is. You've actually moved into a more spiritual space. It's not negative, it's not derogative at all. It's saying, what does dead mean? Dead means you're not engaged with the complex challenges of the world like anyone else of us. Day-to-day challenges. And a 100-year-old is not. A 100-year-old is detached from all that, and they enter into a spiritual space. And that's what it means, dead. Dead means dead from the challenges of life that we live normally, and living a more blissful, peaceful lifestyle in a spiritual way. And that's why the context of the Mishnah about the 100-year-old is not negative at all. It's saying you've reached 100. You've now moved into a sphere of spirituality, of godliness. You're a level higher than where everyone else is holding in their mundane, material challenges of the world. Let's get back to Yitzchak, Isaac. So now Isaac is blind. What are you saying about him? We're saying it's as if he's dead. Why? Because the moment he's blind, he can't see the negativity of the world. He can't see the complicated challenges that we live through in this world. He's now blind. And as a result, he's detached and removed from the rest of the world. That's why it's as if he's dead, because he's not engaging in the material world. God has given him this blissful period of time where he's somewhat detached from the complicated world that we live in today. And so that was Yitzchak, and that's why it says Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Isaac, because Isaac wasn't the same like all of us. And therefore Hashem did not have to wait it out until he dies before he associates his name to Isaac. The moment Isaac has now been removed from the physical and removed from the mundane, he's now in the spiritual space. That's why God can associate his name to him. Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Isaac. It makes sense now. And let's get back to Isaac, to Yaakov leaving town. It says that Yaakov left town. And when he left, he took away the splendor and the majesty. Now, the question we started with, well, what was wrong with Isaac and Rebekah? They were there. They were living in Beersheba. What, just because Yaakov left, he left the place void? No, he didn't. His parents are living there. Here's the answer. His parents were living there, but his parents weren't engaged in society, in the community. Yitzchak was blind. He couldn't engage in the community. He was sitting at home, living his blissful spiritual life, but it wasn't impacting Beersheba at the time. It wasn't changing society in the community because he couldn't. He was limited in that way, Yitzchak, at this point in his life. And what about Rebekah? Well, Rebekah's life was entirely devoted to taking care of her husband. That's what her life was about. So she's now taking care of Yitzchak. The two of them are not having influence on the society around them. They are self-contained within their own home, isolation, quarantine. They ain't doing much for the sake of society. Not to say they didn't. They did in their lifetime. But now it was at the end of their lives. Ki'ilu met, as if they were dead. They were now living a spiritual, blissful lifestyle at home. So who was impacting town? Who was making a difference on the community? Who was creating majesty and splendor in the community? It was their son Yaakov, Jacob. He was the doer, as we say, the asken. He was the busy mover and shaker of society. That was his role. And the fact that Yaakov now leaves town, it creates now a sense of void. Yes, his parents are alive, but his parents are no longer changing the face of the community. It was Yaakov's role, it was Yaakov's job. And the moment Yaakov steps away, a void is created. So back to our question, what makes a hero? A hero is not necessarily someone who stays at home or self-isolates or worries about themselves. The sign of a hero is someone who devotes themselves to changing people, family members, friends, society, community. That's the sign of a hero. That's the sign of Yaakov Avinu. And when Jacob leaves, a void is created. Do you know how many people asked the Rebbe in his lifetime for the opportunity or for his blessings, for them to move and to emigrate to Israel, to make aliyah to Israel? Many, many people consulted him before doing so throughout their years. My parents, may they be well, are also of those who asked the Rebbe for advice and for his blessings before moving from Australia to Israel. What's interesting is that when communal leaders did so, the Rebbe's response was quite straightforward. His answer was, and when I say communal leaders, I mean rabbis, rebbitzins, and lay leaders too. when they would ask him for permission to relocate, to make aliyah, or even to emigrate to any other country, what he would say to them was, well, hold on, at home where you are carrying a role where you are affecting and inspiring communities. You now want to leave that role of influence, impact to the community, and you now want to go to Israel. Why? Because you want to take care of yourself. Most of the requests were part of retirement, or part of learning, or part of the family dynamic. And his point was, I see the need for that. You obviously need to sustain yourself. But are you sure you're ready to leave the impact of the community that you're creating? One particular Rav that we know of here in South Africa that received that response a number of times from the Rebbe was Rabbi Bernard. Rabbi Bernard of the Oxford Shul, many of you I'm sure remember him, many, many times requested from the Rebbe permission to leave his communal responsibilities and travel to Israel and live in Israel. And he received often the response, but you carry such an important role in the community. What is a sign of a hero? A hero is someone who doesn't only worry about themselves, but also worries about others around them. And that could be your own family, could be your own community. So if you're worrying about those around you, hold on before you make such a decision. You've got to think very carefully. What role are you playing in the public, in society? And don't just leave that. Yaakov Abinu, before he left Be'ersheba, he needed Yitzchak to guide him, he needed Rebecca to guide him. It wasn't so simple for Yaakov to pick up and leave. And the Rebbe told Rabbi Bernard, hold on, you're carrying a role of responsibility. You can't just pick up. Why did God put you in this world? To go live in Israel and isolate yourself. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not discouraging Aliyah in whatsoever. My parents, thank God, have been living there for 30 years with my siblings at all. Also, I'm not discouraging that at all. What I'm saying is we've got to calculate what my role and purpose is. And if I carry a role and purpose in a community, in a family, in a work environment, we must think very, very carefully before changing that and before leaving that void. Because the sign of a hero is one who gives of themselves for the sake of others. I know Rabbi Groner in Melbourne, that is, Rabbi Sholem Ber Groner's father, who was my Rav and our family's Rav in Melbourne when we were growing up, had the same requests. He wanted to leave Melbourne and go to Israel. And the Rebbe said to him, but who's going to take over your role back at home in Melbourne? Look what you've built. Look at the community you're leading. Who's going to replace you? And so he stayed. Rabbi Groner had a request before he passed away. He said, if I can't live in Israel while I'm alive, because the Rebbe wants me in my role, in my position as Rav of the community in Melbourne, well, at least when I pass away, make sure to take me to Israel. And in fact, they buried him in Israel, in Har HaZeitim, Mount of Olives, in Israel. Let me share with you another story. Let me share with you another story where we see something similar. And that was about Noach. Noach, it says regarding Noach the following. Tzaddik Tamim Haya. He was a righteous and perfect individual, as we know. But the commentators point out that not so simple. Was he righteous? Was Noach the ideal prototype of a righteous person? So what does it say? In his generation, he was righteous. But had he lived in Abraham's generation, before him, he may not have been so righteous. Sorry, after him. Had he lived in Abraham's generation after him? 1 second. Let me just clarify that. No, had he lived in Abraham's generation after him, he would not have been righteous. Right? Let's just clarify that. In his generation, he was righteous. Had he lived in Abraham's generation, he would not have been righteous. But the question is, let's just read this. Noach passed away in Abraham's 58th year. Because from Adam till Noach was 10 generations. And from Noach till Abraham was another 10 generations, as the Mishnah says. Now, he actually lived in Abraham's generation. What does it mean that if Noach lived in Abraham's generation, he would not have been as righteous? He did live in Abraham's generation. They overlapped each other. So what does it mean he lived in Abraham's generation? So the answer is as follows, and it ties into our original thought. Who was most famous during that time? When Noach and Abraham overlapped each other, who was most famous? Abraham or Noach? Remember, Noach died when Abraham was 58 years old. Abraham, first Jew. Noach was also there. So who was the most famous? The answer is Noach was most famous. Why? Abraham only became famous when he was 75 years old. No one till then actually knew who was Abraham. Interesting. And that's what it means when it says that had Noach lived in Abraham's generation, he may not have been as righteous. Yes, they lived in the same generation, but it wasn't Abraham's generation yet. Abraham's generation actually only began when he was 75 years old. This is the point I want to get to. And so Noach actually did not live in Abraham's generation. What made Abraham's generation his generation? What made Noach's generation his generation? You know what it was? It was the influence that they had on society, on the community. Abraham did not influence society and community until he was 75 years old. What happened when 75 years old came about? That's where God said to him, Lech lecha, go for yourself. From where? From Haran, Mesopotamia, Iraq, travel to Israel. You're going to influence society. And when you travel and when you influence the community, that's when I'll make you big. That's what God promised Abraham. So in fact, Noach and Abraham, although overlapping each other, did not actually shine at the same time. Noach shone in his time. He was the one that built the Teva. He built the ark. It was his role to tell community, tell the world that God's bringing a mabul. He's bringing a flood on the world and do teshuvah, time to repent. So Noach had his time. That was his generation. How do you define Noach's generation? By his influence on the outside. That's Noach's generation. And although he did overlap Abraham, and although Abraham lived at his time, Abraham was a nobody. I'll tell you who knew Abraham. Abraham was known by the people of Ur-Kasdim, which is where he grew up, with Nimrod, the wicked king. They all knew him there. But the outside world, no one knew of Abraham. When Abraham turned 75, and God said to him, Lech lecha, travel from the home of your parents to the land I will show you, and change the community and change the world, that now became Abraham's generation. And Noach did not live in Abraham's time. When Abraham made his mark in society, in the world, with monotheism, Noach was no longer alive. So what do we see? That what makes Noach a hero is the way he influences his generation. What makes Abraham a hero is the way he influences his generation. Not so much, or maybe not enough of what he does at home. Not enough what he does in private. Abraham makes his mark at the age of 75 when he goes out and influences the public. And that's the lesson for us. The practical lesson for us is that what shows heroism on our behalf is not just what I do with my own or myself, is what influence am I having on someone else? And that could start with my own spouse. What influence do I have on my own spouse? How can I inspire? How can I motivate? How can I uplift my spouse? Not just to worry about myself, but to worry about him or her. And then my children. and then my community, and then the next door neighbor or the society around me. That's the sign of a hero. Many people will mock and say, oh, why are you giving of yourself so much? Just worry about yourself. Don't worry about somebody else. It's too much to worry about. But that wasn't the ways of our forefathers. Jacob was about creating splendor and majesty in his community. That was Jacob's role. Noah, Abraham, our leaders, our heroes, they were about creating change. That's what we're about, creating change to as many people as we can create change with. That's our role. That's the sign of a hero. And so let us do the same. Let us create majesty and splendor around us. Let us think of a neighbor, a friend, a project that we can engage with, sponsor, create, motivate, coordinate, whatever we do, just like our forefathers, because that's the sign of a hero. A sign of a hero is not just one who worries about their own daled amot, their own home, their own space, but a hero is one who's able to connect with so many and change whatever we can for so many people on the outside. So thank you to those of you who have joined us or going to be joining us. If you're on Zoom, just hang on the line for one moment. I wish you all a fantastic day and a fantastic week ahead. And we'll see you again next week, Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, for another session of Practical Parsha.